There we go. Hey, welcome back to That 70s Card Show. I'm your host, John Keating, and I thank you for joining me as I take a look back at the cards and the culture of the very colorful 1970s. We'll revisit a more simple time in our hobby by taking a deep dive into the sets and the stats with a generous amount of dad facts sprinkled in. That 70s Card Show is currently sponsored by nobody. If you have a comment or suggestion, I urge you to drop me a line at that70scardShow@gmail.com. That's 70s Card Show on YouTube or 70s Card on Twitter. This is episode 56, and we are going to bring on a special guest here. Uh, a big, big fan of this gentleman. He doesn't know it yet, but we're going to talk about his wonderful work. And his name is Dan Epstein. How are you, Dan?
I'm good, John. Did you say dad facts?
Dad facts. We bring out the dad facts here.
Is it okay? I'm not a dad. Is it okay that I'm on the show?
There's plenty of dad facts in your books. So,
all right, cool.
So Dan is the author of several books about baseball. He's a prolific writer. I want to say you make your living in the music industry, but your true love is 70s baseball, perhaps. So
that's pretty cool. Yeah, I'd say that's a fair enough assessment.
So let's talk about your books real quick. We'll get this out of the way. I have 3 books here that I call the Dan Epstein Trilogy. Big Hair and Plastic Grass, which I've said on my show a few times. It's a book that I just recently finished reading, and I didn't want to finish it, so I was kind of procrastinating because I didn't want it to end, right? I mean, it's one of those things where it's such a good book, you don't want it to end, so you kind of put off, you'll read a page at a time just because you want it to last long. It's tantric reading. And Stars and Strikes, which we have here, 1976 baseball season, and Captain and Me is your newest one, right? And that's it's quite a relationship there. And I haven't read it yet, but I know a little bit about that story, and we'll get into that a little bit down the road here. But I think the foreword is by Diana Munson, right?
And that's right, Thurman's widow.
Yeah, so pretty cool stuff. Now, let's get back to Big Hair and Plastic Grass. Everybody knows I'm a big fan of Oscar Gamble. So HobbyPalooza is this weekend, the 24th, 25th, and 26th on Bench Clear Media. And I will be giving away a signed copy by Dan of this book after we do a little trivia, fun stuff on Saturday night. So stay tuned for that. This is a great book. Again, this is like the Bible to me, Dan, year by year with a couple little vignettes thrown in to break it up. But if you want to know about baseball in the 70s, that is the Bible. Great book, great read, great pictures, So let's talk a little bit about you. We need to get your background story here. Tell me when you were born, where you were born, all that stuff.
I was born 1966 in New York City, but my dad and mom moved from New York to Ann Arbor, Michigan, before I was 2. So I spent my childhood in Michigan, and thus became a Tigers fan out of the gate, and still am to this day. Although I'm not much of a fan of their current incarnation.
Right.
So my first ever Major League Baseball game was May 30th, 1976 at Tiger Stadium. Yankees, Tigers, and I saw Thurman Munson hit a home run that day, which, in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty amazing how it, played out that, over 40 years later, I'd be writing a book about him, and with the assistance of his widow. So that 76 was the year that I really fell in love with baseball, and Stars and Strikes is kind of an outgrowth of that. But also when I was writing Big Hair and Plastic Grass, like that book's all divided up into seasons. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of like you have to fit each season into 25 to 30 pages, which is, a difficult task in itself. And I had to leave out a lot of things. And when I was writing the 1976 chapter, that was the one out of all of them. That was the one where I was like, I wish I had more room. Right. There's so much great stuff. And the thing is, too, with Big Hair and Plastic Grass, I wanted to I thought it was necessary you're doing a survey of the entire decade of the 70s and what happened in baseball. You've got to hit the World Series. And the 76 World Series was like far and away, unless you're a Reds fan, the 76 World Series was far and away the biggest bust of the decade, because it was the Big Red Machine just rolling over the Yankees in 4 straight, no drama, no real excitement. And
same in the playoffs too.
Yeah, rolling over the Phils. And although at least in the playoffs in the American League, the Yankees and Royals, went down to the wire and Chambliss' home run and all that. So that was fun to write about. But I just thought, like, so often we define seasons by the season's World Series. And I just felt like there was such a huge gap between how awesome the 76 season was and how kind of a damp squib the 76 World Series was, that I really felt like it needed a book, to really let the characters sing and breathe and all the crazy stuff that went, and important stuff that went down that season. So literally as soon as I turned in the final manuscript of Big Hair and Plastic Grass, my editor at the time was like, got any ideas for another book? And I was like, yes, 1976. So
right. I noticed the cup.
Yeah. So as I'm sorry, I keep playing with a clip. I'll stop.
No worries.
And one of the things I really enjoyed doing with Big Hair and Plastic Grass was kind of weaving in what was happening in American pop culture, at the time, because I think how that relates to what was happening in baseball is really important. And there was so much incredible pop culture stuff going on in America in 1976 with the bicentennial. And again, I was 10 years old in 76. It just seemed like this whole exciting thing, the bicentennial, the celebration of American history, and we're finally out of Vietnam, and things are looking up, man.
Right.
So it really it left a big mark on me, and so I was really happy to be able to kind of at least try to give that year its due with Stars and Stripes.
Well, I'm looking forward to that, because I don't know about you in 76. I was born in 68, but I got to see Mark Fidrych pitch, which for somebody living in person, somebody living in Philadelphia, the only way I got to see him pitch was I was at the All-Star game in 76. Man. So I that in my mind is my first most outstanding moment of professional baseball, was being at that game and seeing those people.
I am forever jealous, because I never got to, because I lived in Michigan and I never got to see him pitch. We just we only went to a couple of Tigers games a year and never seemed to time it out to when he was on the mound. And
he was a big deal, right? Even at 10, he was a big deal for you, right?
Well, and what was interesting was when he first emerged, and obviously we were talking about it in Michigan before the rest of the country was talking about him. Me and my friends, are a bunch of cynical little fourth graders. We've been, raised on Watergate and the Vietnam War, and we're just convinced that like everything's a sham. Anything you see on TV is a lie. Right. And so like we say, Mark Fidrych, he talks to baseball. He manicures the mound. Like we just thought he was a big fraud and he was doing this for the attention.
Right.
And I remember saying this out loud, like in the presence of my dad. It was one of the few times I ever saw my dad get really angry with me. He just kind of took me aside. He was like, okay, so you know everything, right? You really think that's what's going on, and kind of put me in my place. And but by the time I saw him on Monday Night Baseball, and it's funny because that Monday night game was not broadcast. That game against the Yankees at the end of June '76 was not broadcast in Michigan because of what do you call it? Various blackout restrictions and stuff like that.
Local TVs, right?
But I was spending the summer, or that part of the summer, with my grandparents in Alabama. So it was like, Fidrych is on, and Tigers are on, and that was the game that completely made a believer out of me. And then of course getting to watch him in the All-Star game, even though he didn't do so well, it was still a thrill. And there were 3 Tigers in that, also starting in that All-Star game, which was a thrill in itself.
Who else was in that? Because that's kind of a shoulder year or period for the Tigers, right? It was they
Y-
were a brilliant team for 10 plus years, and then
Yeah, but yeah, 75 was one of the worst seasons in Tigers history.
right.
And then 76, they were, I mean, I think they still finished like 13 games under 500 that year. But
Mhm.
but Ron LaFleur
Okay, all right,
was
that's right. Yep.
he'd had like a 30 game hitting streak at the beginning of the season. So he started he was on the AL starting team, and then Rusty Staub, who
Okay.
the Tigers had obtained in a trade for Mickey Lolich in the offseason. He was having a great season and also started.
So you're at this point you're 10 years old. Were you collecting any cards back then? Are you still a collector, or do you collect now?
All good questions. 76 was when I got my first baseball cards, and really this is like the best introduction to baseball card story I think I could have wished for. April 76, I go to my friend Tim's house for his 10th birthday, and his parents and it's like me, Tim, and like 8 other kids, and his parents take us all to see the Bad News Bears in their
Right.
groovy 70s like Chevy conversion van.
Oh man.
And so Bad News Bears blows my mind because I've never seen a film or a TV show where the kids were real.
Yeah.
It's like everything was always like some super cute kid who's super clever and stuff
Right.
like that, and I hated that shit.
Right.
And Bad News Bears, it's like those are like me and my friends up there, and like like even down to like who the people would be on the team in
Right.
our. So we go back to Tim's house for cake and a sleepover party, and we all get I think 3 or 4 wax packs of Topps cards a piece as party favors. And I'd never had a baseball card before. I didn't really even know much about baseball. Like I knew I had seen Hank Aaron break Babe Ruth's record on TV.
Mhm.
That's like my first engaged baseball memory, and I knew a couple of the names from things I'd seen on TV or whatever, but I didn't really understand it. And so I'm opening these packs, and like I don't know most of these players, but like it's the 76 Topps series, so it's all these bright colors and
Mhm.
bright uniforms and really like like kind of attention getting graphics, and so that was kind of fascinating to me. And then you have those sporting news cards in there, like the historic
Yep.
cards,
Yep.
like
All-time greats. Yep.
all-time greats. So it's like Mickey Cochran. Like I have no idea who this guy is, but it's a black and white photo.
Mhm.
He was a Tiger. He looks really cool. And I remember just and something clicked in my head at that moment because like all through my childhood, I was a big history buff. I would read all these books on like the American Revolution and the Civil War and World War II, and the whole concept of history, and like that people did these things, and
Right.
there were photos and there were documents, and like you could trace all this back. Like at that moment, I realized that there was history with baseball, and like that's when it all kind of came together for me. Like wow, okay, like this has been going on for decades. There were great players then. There are great players now. There are cool old black and white photos.
Right.
There are cool old ballparks that these guys used to play in, and then going into Tiger Stadium a month later with my dad, like that felt. I got the same feeling walking into Tiger Stadium in 1976 that I would get when my grandfather would take me onto like a Civil War battlefield. It was
Sure.
just like this sense of like, wow, like stuff has happened here, and
Right. Yeah.
there are ghosts here, and there was greatness here, and there was defeat here, and there was jubilation and sadness and all
Right.
this stuff. It's like I
Happened
got
right
that
where you
same
are. Yeah.
hit off of walking into a ballpark, and so at that moment, I mean that spring, that's when like, and then every month after that, my grandfather bought me my first copy of the Sporting News, and it's
Right.
like, wow, there's all these box scores, and and my dad had taught me how to read. When he saw that I was interested, taught me how to read the box scores, taught me how to read the back of baseball cards, what the numbers meant. You know, if you were a 300 hitter, that was good. If you hit 20 or more home runs a season, that was good. And, you know, just like, and all these concepts started coming together for me that year. And so, yeah, so I got really into buying cards. And I remember, like, I had friends, you know, who had either they had been buying cards for a couple of years already, or they had older brothers. And so, like, you know, I would just be really into going over to their houses and just looking at, you know, their cards from the 72 series. And, you know, and like in 1976 to a 10-year-old, like a card from 1970, this seems like, you know, ancient, you know, a missive from ancient history. So, yeah, I got in real heavily. And then I probably, you know, collected. And by collected, I mean going down to the drugstore and buying new packs pretty steadily up till about 1980, when I just, all the money started going to records.
Sure.
And
I was going to ask you that, because at some point we all turned to music. And
we had that change where it's just like, baseball's cool, but I want to rock. And so and I remember, like, you know, I didn't have a lot of money, so it was like occasionally, like, maybe my aunt would take me to a hobby store, you know, baseball card store near her house, and she'd let me pick out like old cards, but I couldn't afford any good ones. So they'd be like, you know, it's like, okay, I bought a Sandy Koufax, but it was, you know, one that had been run over by a truck. And, it was just like, but I've got a Koufax, you know. And so I had a whole bunch of those, and I'm sure they, you know, I doubt they would have become worth too much, but I wound up selling pretty much all my cards when I was a sophomore in high school to a friend of mine, so I could buy some Bruce Springsteen bootlegs. And so it's probably, but it was only when I started writing Big Hair and Plastic Grass that I started getting interested in the cards again, for obvious reasons. And one of the great things, and I'd completely forgotten about this, I have a sister who's 2 years younger than me. And, you know, out of, you know, we were always together, and out of, you know, wanting both, you know, a way to bond, but also to get her interested in what I was interested in, you know, I would give her all my baseball card doubles. And she kept them. And so, you know, in like 2008, as I'm writing Big Hair and Plastic Grass, she's like, "Oh, I found these. I think you'll want them." And she sends me, like, you know, this stack of 76, 77, 78 cards that I'd, you know,
time capsule, right?
Yeah. So I still have those. And and then, you know, over the last 10 years, you know, whenever I've done readings, people always, you know, have cards they want to give me, or you know, or when, you know, I'll be in like an antique mall and maybe I'll just stumble across a Fidrich card I don't have. I'll buy it, or Doc Ellis or Thurman. So
you're suggesting I write a book, and that way people will give me baseball cards.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, as long as it's tangentially related to baseball cards. But it sounds like you've got a good jumping off point for that.
Yeah. So it's you know, 14 years old, you go from, I don't know what you wanted to be when you were 10, but I obviously at 14 years old you wanted to be a rock star, like a lot of us, right?
No, actually, that didn't happen till later. At 14, I wanted to be an archaeologist.
Okay.
and then I
that wasn't Indy Jones yet, right? Wasn't Indiana Jones?
It was
about
later,
a year
before. No, it was about a year before. Or no, actually, I think it was right around that time. But I'd wanted to be an archaeologist before Indiana Jones. Thank you very much. But I was into Raiders of the Lost Ark. But I had a meeting. I was through a friend of my mom's. I was able to meet up with a guy who was the head archaeologist for the University of Chicago. I was living in Chicago at the time. I was the head archaeologist for the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute, which, you know, was all about the study of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, all this stuff. And you know, I rattled off a bunch of things, you know, books I'd read, things I knew, to him, hoping to impress him. And he was like, "Kid, let me give you a piece of advice. get rich, then become an archaeologist. So after that, I wanted to be a journalist,
Okay.
and that's and that's kind of what I
Wow.
became.
Right. Right.
But I did have I didn't really learn to play guitar until I was like out of high school, and
Mhm.
then so after but in college I was in bands, and after college I put a band together in Chicago and tried to make it,
Right.
and that didn't happen, so I fell back on the lucrative world of journalism.
Sure. See, lucky for me, the only thing I ever remember wanting to do was working for a band, because I saw Kiss when I was 10 years old, and that
Oh,
was it.
hell
I
yeah.
told mom,
Dude, you saw Fiddler's and Kiss? Ah,
yeah, how about that, huh? Yeah, so I told my
76.
mom I'm gonna do that for a living, and I ended up doing it for a living. I didn't Yeah, that was, I guess I'm one of the lucky ones, huh?
Yeah, that's
But,
awesome.
yeah, so I assume you went to college,
I did. I went
and then
to,
a journalism major in
no.
college? Oh my god, you could make more U-turns than anybody.
Yeah, no, I was a film major in college.
Okay.
I went to Vassar in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I really I started out as an English major, but for various reasons didn't think that that was something I wanted to pursue. But I was writing for the school paper the whole time, and writing for the I was working on the radio station. Had a weekly show, and was also writing for the radio station magazine and
Sure.
stuff. So I was always doing that stuff. But I really fell in love with film when I was at college, and when I realized like, hey, I could major in this, and I could just like go see films 3 or 4 nights a
Yeah,
week.
right,
This is
huh? How about
awesome.
that?
So and they had a really good film program. So but yeah, when I graduated, the intent was not to go into film in any way. The intent was to get back to Chicago with my boys and take over the world
Yeah.
with our band. And
So you wrote for a bunch of magazines, right? And
yeah,
but
still
but
do.
but are your only full-length books, is this what I'm talking about here, the trilogy, or do you have other books? Do you have, music books?
Yeah, well, there's the first book I ever wrote is a book called 20th Century Pop Culture, which is kind of
Okay.
a year by year look at really not so much 20th century, but post World War II pop culture developments in America. So there's music stuff in
Okay.
there. And I wrote an ebook about country music called
Okay.
Honky Tonk Tourist, the night Buck Owens almost got me
Right.
killed.
Right.
And
I was reading about that. That's very interesting.
no, I mean, I've actually tried to write a couple of music related books with musicians.
Mhm.
I think what am I think I'm 0 for 3, 0 for 4 at this point. Yeah,
Okay.
where it's just like for one reason or another, either the collaboration fell apart or we couldn't get publisher interest or whatever. So similar to what I did with Ron Bloomberg for the Captain and Me book,
Mhm.
which was sort of an as told to with various musicians of note, or at least that I thought were of note. But the publishers are just like, who?
Yeah, right, right, right.
So I actually have a couple of other music ideas kind of kicking around in my head that I'm hoping to in the next year, at least put a foot forward towards making a reality.
I imagine the mind of a writer is constantly filled with, uh, whirlpools and eddies, right?
Yes.
Constantly going, and eventually some of those ideas come out, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, so that's yeah, that they're who knows what it'll cough up
Right.
next, but that's the plan in any case.
Did you ever find a passion for any of the other, sports? Baseball, I assume the Tigers are still your favorite team,
Yeah,
right? And,
definitely.
any of the other, I mean, Detroit's a big hockey town, right? But,
Yeah, I liked the idea of hockey and the Red Wings, but I still don't really understand it. There
I'm
was
with
a
you.
period of time, like I think when I was about 10 to 12, I was so before music really kicked in, I was so sports mad that like, when baseball season was over, I would glom onto football. And of course, growing up
Yeah,
in Ann Arbor, Michigan, University of Michigan
yeah,
football was huge.
sure.
Um, And they had a
And
good basketball team too, so I was into college hoops, into college football, into professional football and basketball a little less.
mhm.
I kind of followed it, but I wasn't passionate about either. And I remember watching hockey in like those cold months between the Super Bowl and opening
Spring
day.
training.
Yeah, just like anything. Like
Yeah.
I remember watching like ABC's Wide World of Sports used to do these like just ridiculous uh, shows where it'd be like, I think it was called the Superstars or something like that. It would be like, pitting the Pittsburgh Steelers against the New York Yankees in,
Right.
a game of tug of war. And,
Yeah.
it was just like,
Battle of the
right.
Superstars.
And it
Yeah.
was just
Yeah.
like, I need
Yeah.
to watch this. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so once I got really heavy into music, that need to have constant sports in my life kind of went out the window, and it just
Sure.
kind of reverted back to baseball only.
So let's talk a little bit about the 70s. What do you think the
Yes,
biggest
please.
change? Yeah, the biggest change in baseball, and it's interesting. When I read your book, it was like I was reading my own mind because I've the past year I've done this podcast. I've said essentially most of what you've said in the book. But tell me what you think the biggest change was.
Well, I think the absolute biggest change, and the change that continues to impact the sport massively to this day, is free agency. I think this whole notion that players could kind of, make their own decisions about their careers, that could sell themselves to the highest bidder. I mean, that was so revolutionary in 1976 that if you go back and look at the coverage of that, you see, like, I mean, a lot of the writers didn't even understand
Right,
what
right.
that meant, and
Yep.
what that meant, what that would mean for the future.
Sure.
So, I mean, economically, that changed everything about the game. And a lot of people say, well, that this is, that was horrible, because now players don't stay with the same team forever anymore. They don't,
Mhm.
ticket prices, blah, blah, blah. But, the fact is that ticket prices and player salaries are not, there's not really a correlation there.
Right.
And I've always been, I mean, I know a lot of fans are like, oh, you get so much money to play a kid's game. I've always been on the side of the players with that. I think what they do is phenomenal. A very, very, very small percentage of men can play baseball on that level.
Right.
And that's what we're paying to see. That's why we get interested in the game. With the exception of Bill Veeck, I've never gone to a ballpark to see the owner. And so it's like they should get an equitable cut of the pie.
Yeah,
If
for sure.
the teams are bringing in billions, then give the players a big, an equitable chunk of that.
Yep, they're partners, right? Biggest event. What do you think the biggest single event in 70s baseball was?
I think probably Hank Aaron breaking Babe Ruth's
Okay.
all-time home run record. I think that was, that was such a, on so many levels, that was really important. I think, this notion that this record that was going to, I mean, even before I knew anything about baseball, I knew that Babe Ruth was the man. He was
Right.
the all-time great. And so, like, as baseball's just kind of creeping into my consciousness, and I see that somebody's about to, break the home run record set by Babe Ruth, like, that was, that was like rearranging history in my mind. And and the fact that a black man did it, and did it with so much hatred directed at him. And and it's not like anyone ever hated Hank Aaron before this. He was never a controversial player. He was not a Barry Bonds. He was not a, not saying that controversial players are worthy of hatred, but it's like, like the treatment that people were giving, say, Dick Allen back in those days, all of a sudden, it was completely zeroed in on Hank, because he had the temerity to break a record set by a white guy.
Sure.
And like, even as a little kid, I was just like, oh man, this is, this is some bullshit. And so I think, and I remember us talking about this in my school, like the teacher brought all these things that I just mentioned up, and like, so it was not just a huge event on a baseball level, but like on a social level. Like, people were talking about this, and people were having to have the conversation. Like, why do people hate Hank Aaron? Like, why are they sending him death threats? Why are, why is this guy who's done nothing but great things for the game, like, suddenly public enemy number one to these people? And so I feel like, for a lot of people, not just me, that was a real, that was a really important event on a lot of levels.
Yeah, he was a reluctant groundbreaker, but he, like Jackie Robinson, he was the right guy at the right time, because he did it with such dignity, and our generation, I think, learned a lot about, wow, here's this black athlete that is great at what they do, and we didn't have any, we were essentially colorblind, right? We saw this great athlete doing a great thing, and to us, it didn't matter what color he was. He was just this guy doing this great thing. So,
right. So what's the problem?
Yeah, exactly. Now it obviously was the old school that had the problem, but it was, Hank Aaron, I always say, is the greatest hitter of my lifetime. The statistics that he rolled up were amazing, and he did it again with class and dignity, and absolutely amazing, right?
Yeah, and by all accounts, was just a fantastic teammate, and and it was interesting too, because I was, I spent a lot of summers in Alabama in the 70s with my grandparents, and so we got WTCG, which later became TBS, which was Ted Turner's station. So, that was a real treat, because, like, even though the Braves were terrible in those days, it was like, it's baseball on TV. That's the thing. People forget that, like, you didn't have the MLB network. You back then, if you were lucky, you got to see 2 games a week on
Sunday.
TV.
Yeah, we would see Sunday games, and the other 5 or 6 nights a week were radio.
Right.
You would see national game on Monday Night Baseball, but otherwise, I learned to enjoy the game with my ears, falling asleep to games and stuff like that. And,
me too, man. Like listening to Ernie Harwell.
Wow.
So great. And my mom lived in LA, so I would listen to Vin Scully when I was out visiting her. And so, that was like a master class. But so with, being so close to the Braves, like, I, read a lot of things in the papers, local papers, about what was going on with the Braves, and, and just this whole notion that, like, Hank Aaron would have really kind of wanted to manage the Braves after he retired, and they were just kind of like, well, maybe we'll give you a meaningless front office position, and just like even that, it was like, oh man, so that's how it is, huh? That was pretty educational as well.
All right, this is statistically, I'm not speaking statistically here, but which player I consider, I'm calling it the best player of the 70s, but who do you think epitomizes the 70s more than any single player?
Reggie Jackson.
I think you and I just became best friends. That is you get 10 bonus points for that, for sure. All right,
without a doubt.
Without a doubt, right?
He wasn't the best player of the 70s, but he was the quintessential 70s player.
Exactly. And he, again, right, he owes a lot to people, like Jackie and Willie and Hank doing their thing. He was able to be him because those guys did what they did.
Right.
And he was still a threat to some people, but boy, he did it his way, and he didn't care. And that's what I love about Reggie.
And was great when it counted.
Sure.
And was just, it was a lot of fun to watch. It was also maddening to watch, but
back then you could hit 32 home runs and strike out 160 times. It didn't matter. But the 5 rings don't lie, though, right?
No, absolutely.
Best team of the 70s. This is not a trick question. There's only one correct answer here.
I'm going to go with the Oakland A's.
All right, I'm going with the greatest offensive team of all time, the 76 Reds. They led the league in every offensive. I'm talking about the majors. And
Are you? Oh, you're going by season.
yeah,
I
it's by
thought you
season.
meant
I'm
for the whole
sorry. I'm
sports.
the
Yeah,
best individual team. I'm
yeah.
with
No,
you
I
on
can't.
that though. The
You're
A's
right.
were my
I
favorite
can't
teams.
argue with you on the
Yeah.
76 Reds. I mean, they were. I remember like hating them
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
I also was a Dodgers fan at that point. You know, going to see my mom, and the first Dodger game I ever saw was the Dodgers against the Reds at Dodger Stadium. But I remember hating them, but also being in awe. Just
Yeah.
like, you know, it's like, wow, there's Pete Rose, there's Johnny Bench, there's Joe Morgan, there's Tony Perez, there's
Right.
George Foster. You know, it's just
Yeah.
like they just kept sending these guys up to the plate.
Mate.
Like they could, you know, and Cesar Geronimo, who hit like
Yeah.
what 326 that year or something like that, and he's hitting in the eighth slot.
Yeah. Ken Griffey, right? You know, and
Griffey,
yeah.
Concepcion. I mean,
They
they
were all
were,
machines. They were literally machines. It
yeah,
seems like they didn't show emotion. They just went out and beat the
and
crap out of
killed
you.
you.
Right.
And you know, I really feel like, you know, that when they got rid of Tony Perez,
Mm.
that was such, you know, a mistake that
They lost
really
their
kind of
soul.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, but like he you know, he wasn't the flashiest, he didn't put up the biggest numbers, although he drove in a hell of a lot of runs, but he just was kind of like the rock of that team, and
Right.
it was not the same after he
So that
left.
when who did they put it first? I guess it was Dreesen at that
Yeah,
point, or
yeah,
okay,
it was Dreesen.
because I know
Who
Rose
who
moved all over the place, right? Rose
and
played third, and then
Dreesen did really well, at least the first couple of seasons. I mean, you know, he was no slouch, but he wasn't Tony Perez.
yeah, they got Seaver, and they still couldn't do it, right? In '78, whatever. This one's going to be a lot more difficult, but I think you only have three options here. And you may have already mentioned them. Give me the the best. Well, I shouldn't say best. Who is the most colorful owner of the '70s? Because that's maybe it's a four-man race there.
Yeah, well, definitely Bill Veeck,
Okay,
but I think, you know, Charlie Finley is right up there. Ted Turner is right up there,
right,
and I think, you know, I think Steinbrenner, even though he didn't, you know, those other three all had crazy promotions
right.
to their as part of their legend, which Steinbrenner did not. But I feel like he was such a presence that you really can't say like, oh yeah, those three and Steinbrenner's over here. I mean, he was really as much of a part of the show as his players.
Yeah, I mean, the stories you tell in the book about Steinbrenner, it's just it's such a, I don't even want to say passive aggressive. It's aggressive and more aggressive. Those relationships between him, Reggie, and Billy.
Oh
And
man, it's as I say in Big Hair and Plastic Grass, it's Shakespearean. I mean,
exactly
it's so Byzantine and convoluted and
right.
playing each off the other, and
Yeah,
yeah, it's so crazy, and you know, and just him and Billy alone, and like the whole thing that, like, you know, like he was gonna hire Billy back for what, like the sixth time, if
yeah,
Billy hadn't, you know, gotten drunk and driven his car off the road and died.
right.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's the two of them really just kind of, you know, brought out the worst in each other, yet they couldn't stay away. It was like this dysfunctional romance.
oh man. All right, so those are questions I want to ask there, which I think is awesome. Tell me about music now, right? I have very strong opinions about the music of the '70s. First of all, what are you in a position where you can even name your favorite artist? Do it being that you're in the business.
Yeah,
All right,
absolutely. The
let me have
Kinks,
it. The
the
Kinks,
Kinks.
really? That's interesting.
Yeah, by I think yeah, it was Ray Davies' birthday yesterday, which
Okay,
I celebrated by blasting several albums. Yeah, just like I think as a songwriter, as I mean, I spent a year of my childhood in England, so you know, from a very early age, I had Anglophilic tendencies,
hmm
and obviously, you know, what Ray Davies wrote a lot about English life, and so
right.
that was always very interesting to me, and with a sort of wit that, you know, didn't really get from a lot of American songwriters. And then
Which
he
is
had
ironic because every one of those artists will tell you that they're just, I think it was Mick Jagger that once said, we're just playing your music back to you.
it's
Right?
true, but and the Kinks were musically, but lyrically, they, after they got, the R&B covers out of their system on the first couple of records, Ray would just went really deep into, writing about, suburban British life, and really kind of, small lives, small details. And but then, he had his brother Dave Davies, who was this amazing, just really viscerally oriented guitar player.
Mhm.
And so to me, that combination of the two is always very powerful and fascinating. So yeah, I've been a Kinks fan since I was probably, I don't know, 12. And yeah, they're still number one for me.
Who's more dysfunctional, the Davies brothers, or the Gallagher brothers, do you think?
That's a really good question. They're certainly cut from similar cloth. I mean, I would say the Davies brothers, only because I actually saw them get into a fight on stage. I saw Oasis several times, never saw anything actually come out on stage, but I saw Dave was like stepping out in the spotlight and doing this wailing solo, and Ray sort of like wanders into this other spotlight and does this big kind of stage yawn while his brother's playing, right as his brother happened to look over at him, and it was on from there. So and that's obviously, that's part of why I love them as well.
Yes.
Where they're just human, and
yeah, for sure.
They've never set themselves up as gods or as these untouchable beings. They're just these guys from this kind of messed up background who
Right.
took it with them the rest of the way.
Yeah. So Van Halen did at least 2 covers.
Yes.
Which one do you prefer?
Well, I would say I love that they brought back "Where Have All the Good Times Gone," because at that point that was not a song that most people remembered, or
Right.
I remember like walking out of one Kinks show in like 1983, and somebody saying ahead like, "Oh man, I wish they'd done Where Have All the Good Times Gone." And this other kid was like, "What, they do that song?"
Yeah.
So there's that, but I mean, their version of "You Really Got Me" was so, especially on Van Halen 1, where you've got Eruption going into "You Really Got Me." I mean, in when I was in 8th grade, a friend of mine's parents owned a disco in Chicago, and we would go, and they would open it up for like us to have parties there on like Saturday afternoons, like, and we would just play. We were all, these little rock kids, so we would all like play rock records over this, insane sound system, and and they had this like lighting rig for the dance floor that was basically like all these different sort of neon light sculptures overhead, and then like reflective dance floor, and the light sculptures would flash on and off kind of in relation to different frequencies in the music. So whatever song was playing, you would get a completely unique kind of light show to go with it. And I remember like sitting there in a booth on the dance floor watching the lights as well, listening to Eruption and "You Really Got Me" blasted at full on concert level, and just it was practically a religious experience for me.
Right. Wow. So best concert you ever been to? Do we have an answer for that?
Yeah, I would say lot. I mean, there are a lot of contenders, but the best one would be George Clinton and the P-Funk All-Stars at the Riviera in Chicago, Halloween 1989.
Yeah, they call it it's actually
the
theater, the Riviera.
Yeah.
I've played there several times with bands. So interesting, 1989, huh?
Yeah, because this was right, like Clinton had kind of had a period where he'd gotten really into drugs and sort of spun out, and this was the first time that he'd really gotten a lot of the old, Funkadelic and Parliament players back together. So it's
Bootsy
like
with him?
Bootsy was not with them, but Eddie Hazel was,
Okay.
and to this day is the only time I ever got to see Eddie Hazel live. And this was right around the time that I was really getting into the deeper, like early Funkadelic stuff, the really like psychedelic hard rock shit, and so to be able to see them and play a lot of that music in itself was amazing. But it was also Halloween.
Oh,
So
wow.
everybody in the
Yeah.
crowd was dressed up. People were just, out of their
Freaky.
heads.
Yeah,
And then
freaky
they had a costume contest in between like two of the encores, judged by George Clinton, and that was its own kind of complete chaos. So I mean, that whole experience, I think I lived probably about a mile from the Riv at that time. I just remember floating home afterwards, just like that was the best thing ever.
What's the other place they do concerts there? It's not the Agora. The Agora is somewhere else. Agora's in Cleveland. Aragon. Which one do you prefer, the Aragon or the
Aragon Ballroom?
Yeah.
I get the sight lines at the Aragon were better. I remember that.
It's like a roller skating rink, essentially, an indoor roller skating rink.
Exactly. And with the spring floors and stuff. And
Yep.
I remember like they used to sell beer by the vat there, like back in the early 80s. And people would just like drink their vat of beer and then throw the empty container at the stage. And I remember seeing the Ramones there in 84, and somebody threw this big, empty tub up on stage, and it like right between songs, and it hit Joey Ramone in the crotch, and he just walked on the mic and said, "Let the container, huh?" And then they just went into the next song.
Like, yes, man, yeah, punk rock, right? What's the best album of all time?
Probably "Forever Changes" by Love. I mean, I think that's you'll find that ends up on a lot of lists, but that's a record that it's just.
Was that from the 70s?
Yeah. I'm sorry. No, that was.
No, I was asking overall, but I'm trying to figure out when it was.
Best album of the 70s.
When was Love? When was the Love album released?
In the 70s.
No, you're saying the one you just.
68.
68. Okay, so give me a 70s album that you.
I'd say "What's Going On" by Marvin Gaye.
Okay. There you go. Wow. Well, I mean, that's what you do for a living. You know music.
Yeah,
you're definitely more evolved than I am. I would have said The Wall, but that's just
yeah. Well, okay. I guess it's weird. I think of that as a 1980 record, but it did come out late 79.
Yeah, the story is the record company wanted it done before Christmas.
Right.
79.
Get it out there.
Yeah. And,
no, that's a great record. I mean, I these days, and obviously Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, that's a phenomenal achievement in and of itself.
Yeah, that's a different show. All those Pink Floyd. You changing tracks here. We're going to get into The Captain and Me here in a minute. But do you follow modern baseball? Are you as big a fan now as you were when you were 10?
I pretty much got off the abandoned it completely about 3 years ago, and absolutely nothing. I've catch a little bit here and there. I read, things that writers I follow will write, and just all of this is like, this is just a shit show. I really, and also I feel like, the pandemic really changed a lot of my, I guess, perspective on things. And it's like, pretty much, if something's not giving me pleasure anymore, why?
Sure.
And music has which, I've loved for most of my life. Like in the last couple of years, it's really even more so been my go-to for, for pleasure, for joy, for comfort. Right. And, and when I watch baseball, the current version, it gives me none of those things. So,
modern music? Are we talking modern music? Or are we talking
some modern music? Yeah, no, I mean, there are some really good, I don't know if you know this guy Ty Segall, but he's out of LA. He's kind of, he gets kind of lumped into like the psychedelic garage band, but I think he's a bag, but I think he's a lot more varied and interesting than that. And,
I get you.
really interesting sonic experiments, but also a great songwriter and guitar player. So I'd say he's definitely one of my favorites of the current crop. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like, there's so much great music that's already been released that like it's hard not, like Marvin Gaye, like Curtis Mayfield, like, Funkadelic, like, there's so much great stuff that like I know this will make me feel good, and I need it to make me feel good right now. So, let's head back to the Kinks section.
Yeah, it's funny because, I don't get a thrill watching old sporting events because I know the outcome, right? But I'll listen to a record over and over and over again.
Although I mean, I get that, and I mostly agree, but like, there's something about watching like an old broadcast of This Week in Baseball from like 77 that really, I mean, that's
Mel
like
Allen,
comfort.
yeah,
That's
for
comfort
sure.
food
Come
for
on.
me.
That's
And,
great though. Yeah, I love that stuff.
or all the All-Star games where like, you don't care so much about the outcome, but it's just great seeing all those guys and all those uniforms. And
hey, do you like, you ever hear of Plush?
yeah,
they're pretty, I mean, I'm not a modern music guy. To me, modern music, the last modern music band I appreciated was Audio Slave, but I
actually have a couple of friends who played in Plush for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I might have to investigate that because I have a friend, an acquaintance that just did a tour with them. They were the opening act, and through the videos and the posts, I was like, well, these guys aren't bad, but I don't know. Who's got the time though, right?
Yeah, no, there's that's the thing though. You kind of gotta, you gotta make the commitment to dig because there is a lot of crap out there, but there is a lot of really good stuff. Talk
to me about The Captain. And I kind of know about the story, but maybe you can tell us about this book without, I don't want you to read every page, but tell us a little bit about this book and how you hit upon this relationship, because I know a little bit about the relationship and what Thurman did for Ron, but
so basically about 3 years ago, a mutual friend put me in touch with Ron Bloomberg and said, he's interested in working on a book, and I thought you'd be perfect for him. And at the time, I just had those music books that went nowhere. I had a couple of those experiences, and it was like, so it's just like, I don't know that I'm up for this. And he's just like, look, just call him. At the very least, you can say you've had a phone conversation with the first DH. Like, okay, sold. So I called him, and we really hit it off. And he actually he wanted to write a book about DHs, and I just thought, like, A, I'm not really interested in that, and B, I wasn't sure that there would be a market for that. But we were talking some more, and he started telling me all these Thurman Munson stories, and I had not, because Ron's career, like his peak happened before I became a baseball fan. So he was not somebody I really, thought about much when I was a kid. Obviously, I thought a ton about Thurman because, he was my favorite catcher. I got to see him play and, hit a home run in my first ever baseball game.
And his death was pretty impactful for
man,
people
it was
our age.
Traumatic. And so, I mean, anybody of our general age, like you say, Thurman, the first thing they all want to talk about is, oh man, I remember where I was when he died. And it's like, yeah, I mean, we're all like that. So I had no idea that Ron and Thurman were so close. I kind of abstractly knew that they had been on some Yankees teams together, but I didn't realize that they had been best friends and actually had roomed together. And the more he was telling me about these stories, the more I was seeing a part of Thurman Munson that I did not know existed. This part, this guy who was a loyal friend, who was, a tender person with kids, a guy who, away from the ballpark in the right setting, could actually be the life of the party. Whereas, like everything I'd ever read about him when I was a kid was like, oh, he's mean, he's tough, he's gruff, he's a great player, but he's an asshole. And
melancholic, the whole thing.
Right. And he's really sensitive and all this. And he was sensitive, but in a good way as well. And that he was such a great teammate and leader, and and we get into this in the book where Ron had the potential to be a great player, and I was kind of fascinated by the arc of their respective careers, where they're drafted number one a year apart, and they kind of come up, not together, but like on parallel tracks in the minors. And then, Thurman comes up in 70 and wins, his rookie of the year. And then Ron comes up, halfway through the 71 season and all that. And, Ron could have been one of the greats, but for two things. One, that he was basically platooned from the get-go. It was sort of decided that he was only fit to hit against right-handed pitching.
Who was his counterpart on the right side?
It depended from year to year.
Okay.
I mean, it went through a lot of different sort of,
Okay.
right-handed, it's like, I think, what's his name from the Mets? They got at one point, I think right around the, why am I spacing on his name? The guy who made the great catch in the
Swoboda?
Swoboda, yes, right. So they got Swoboda as a right-hander literally the day that they brought Ron up to the big league.
Okay.
So it was just like, there was never a chance.
Right.
And then he kept getting injured. And so, it's this, and this was not something I really knew about Ron until I started talking to him, was that, like, how much time he spent on the DL, how hard he battled to make it back as a player. And, and realizing that, through all these, just soul-crushing moments, that Thurman was the only guy in the entire Yankee squad who really, had his back, who really went out of his way every day to be like, how's it going? You okay? What can we do? What, you're going to come back, don't give up. And just really constantly kind of grabbing
advocating.
him. Yeah. And to the extent that, like, other players on the team would be talking smack about Ron behind his back because, oh, here's this guy in the whirlpool again, drawing a salary while we're out playing. And Thurman actually, stood up to these guys and was like, he's working hard. You guys can, shut up about that right now.
Right.
Also got into it with some reporters about that, who had written some nasty things about Ron, about him jaking. And so, it was like, wow, this guy was really, a mensch. And so the more we talked, I realized, like, it's sort of a Bang the Drum Slowly kind of story, which is interesting because both Ron and Thurman are in Bang the Drum Slowly. Okay. Where it's just like this bond between two very, very different people. I mean, Ron's this garrulous Southern boy who just loves everybody and loves to talk, and Thurman's this, like, grouchy dude from the Midwest who, just wants to be left alone to do his thing. And yet they absolutely adored each other and kind of, leaned on each other and learned from each other. And then obviously, I mean, you think Thurman's death was traumatic to us, it really, really messed Ron up. And so we talk about that in the book as well. But it's really, so I think, in all the baseball books I've written, I really, like, the human element is really important to me. I don't want it to be about numbers or, like, matching this guy's WAR up against somebody else's. It's just like, what's interesting to me is the people who actually were involved and what they were like. I mean, when I meet old players, I never say, like, oh, who had the best curveball or stuff like that. Like, I want to know, like what bars did you guys go out to? Where, where, what would you guys do for fun on an off day? And so there's a lot of that in this book. And there's some really interesting stories that I would not have seen coming in a million years that Ron told me. So I think anybody I don't think you have to be a Yankees fan necessarily to enjoy The Captain and Me. I think anybody who, loves baseball, loves, a human story, and especially a human story set in the 70s, will dig it.
Yeah. So the thing I know about these two chaps is towards the end of his career, I think Thurman, pressuring, whatever word you want to use. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm just paraphrasing a little too much, but pressuring management to keep him on the payroll or bring him back, right? Do I get that right or no?
Well, here's the thing. Thurman felt that he was underpaid for what he did for the Yankees, and that really was thrown into relief when they signed Reggie Jackson as a free agent, because Thurman thought he had an understanding with George Steinbrenner that as captain of the team, he would with the exception of Catfish.
I was going to ask you about Catfish because Catfish preceded Reggie, right?
Right, and Catfish had this crazy deal, and so it was kind of like, okay, I'm never going to be paid as much as Catfish, but I want to be the second highest paid player on the team. And so when Reggie was signed to a deal that was still, I think, lower than Catfish's, Thurman thought like, all right, I'm going to get a commensurate bump, and it didn't happen. And instead of being straightforward about that, Steinbrenner kind of strung him along, was like, oh, well, let's talk. And then like really kind of made Thurman justify his demands, which, drove Thurman nuts because, clearly the guy was out there giving his all every day and, catching both ends of double headers, handling the pitching staff beautifully, and also hitting 300 and driving 100 runs.
Which catchers didn't there was only one other catcher that did that back then.
Yeah, right. Or Bench and Fisk, basically.
Yeah, or Fisk.
So that made him very bitter. And so from about 77 on, he would always say is that he wanted to be traded to Cleveland because he lived in Akron. Or Canton rather. He'd played ball in college in Akron, but he lived in Canton, and so playing in Cleveland would have meant that he could go home every night to see his family, and he was a very devoted family man.
Which he was kind of doing anyway, right? Was he not flying?
Well, that's what happened because they didn't trade him to Cleveland, so he didn't get into flying until really, I think the 78 season, and where he was sort of like, well, okay, if you're not gonna give me, the money I want, and you're not gonna trade me to Cleveland, I'm going to buy a plane and I'm going to fly home after games, which he did a lot of, which was, and on road trips, he'd take his own plane and the Yankees, I think nowadays there would be some sort of contract clause where it's like, no, you can't do that. But then they were just like, well, okay, we'll let him do this. And what killed him was he kind of graduated to a bigger plane too quickly. Like he had this one kind of, small, almost kind of like, my first private plane, sort of thing. And then he, wanted to upgrade to a bigger, faster one, more room, more power.
Cut down on commute time, right?
Exactly.
Get home quicker.
And so, but he had not spent enough time behind the controls before they, kind of let him take it. Right. And he was basically still practicing with it, and that's when he died, was doing practice runs at the local airport. Right. He wasn't like coming home after a game or something. He was just, let's see what this does. Let's see, and he either lost control of it or something went wrong that he didn't know how to make the adjustment on, and went off the runway and probably would have lived if the plane hadn't hit this huge tree stump that had been left. It was not on the runway, obviously, but it was like in this area off the runway. So when the plane skidded off the runway, it hit the tree stump right where the pilot seat was. And that's what paralyzed him. And then so he was not able to exit the plane.
Was there two other people there and they survived?
Two other people and they survived. And one was an instructor, one was just like a acquaintance.
Okay.
And it's hard to excuse me.
No worries, man.
we talk about this in the book where it's like, Ron was like, that was really Thurman's last, his last action
Right.
was that of a captain. He was just like, leave me, get
Yeah.
yourself to safety.
Yeah.
Just, under no uncertain terms, like you can't help me, you need to help yourselves. And,
Selfless, right?
yeah, to the end, and just like knew, understood the situation, knew what had to be done, and that was, him in a game situation. That was him, in the very last moments of his life.
Do we think Thurman? I think he's deserved, but do we think he's ever going to get in the Hall of Fame? I
hope so.
I can see it happening, right?
Yeah. I mean, Ron's really pushing, really trying to make that happen. I'm really cynical about the Hall of Fame at this point. I really think that, it's the same with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think there's a lot of people who are in there who yeah, okay, I guess,
right.
but
Madonna, right? We need Madonna in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Somebody didn't even write their own songs, right?
There's all kinds of stuff involved, and I just feel, I feel the same way about Dick Allen or Dave Parker. Like these guys were just giants of their era, but because of one thing or another, whether it's the character clause or
right,
hey,
there's some scoundrels in that. There's some scoundrels in that building.
There's a lot of scoundrels in that Hall of Fame, and I just feel like there have been so many loopholes that the writers have used over the years to not vote for guys who they didn't like for some reason or had some grudge against. But also, I think you see that with the players committees, the veterans committees. I think there's been a lot of reluctance to let other people into that club. The players who are still living, and so obviously that's not a thing for Thurman. But I just think it's been so long. And frankly, we talked about me kind of forgetting baseball for a while when I got into rock music. That pretty much happened, in the years immediately following Thurman's death. And I just kind of assumed that he was in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I started writing Big Hair and Plastic Grass that I was like, wait a minute, he's not? This is one of the great catchers of the era. And also it's one of those things where okay, so he didn't hit 20 home runs a season. So he didn't draw a ton of walks or whatever statistical thing you want. He by most statistical measurements, he was still a damn great player. And what there's no way the Yankees win 3 pennants in a row and 2 World Series in a row without Thurman behind the plate. No way. He's the guy who handled the pitching staff. He's the guy who, even when the crap was going on with Reggie, in 77 and 78, he was the guy who kind of grabbed the reins of the team and was just focus, and without that, it would have just been complete chaos, and they never would have, never would have achieved. And also whenever Billy, was getting into it with the players on the team, they sort of lined up behind Thurman, where it's what, let's forget about that guy. Let's just go out. And same with George. Forget about what he's going on about. Let's just win.
Yeah, the interesting part too, and sorry for interrupting, is it's not like these guys all, the Phillies all came up through the minors together. Thurman had led a team that were mercenaries.
Yeah.
Every position, these guys were from somewhere else.
Right. Most of them from Cleveland.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, it's like Mickey Rivers they got from the Angels. Reggie signed as a free agent out of A's via Baltimore.
Pinella, Randolph, Chambliss, Nettles, all from somewhere. All the pitch. Well, Guidry was Guidry was the next generation. It's not like he toiled in the minors with Thurman,
But Thurman was really important in Guidry's development too. And in fact, there is an incident where, early on in Guidry's career, where he had been brought in a game situation, and or maybe he was doing a spot start. We talk about it in the book where it's like he was running into some trouble, and Billy's heading to the mound and Thurman gets there first. It was basically like, you tell him that you refuse to leave the mound. Like don't go quietly into the showers,
Right,
young
right,
man.
right.
Like stand up for yourself. And he did, and Billy was like, oh, okay, fine. And left him in, and he got out of the situation. But Billy was somebody who did not have a lot of faith in Gitry early on,
Okay.
and so Thurman knew that, and Thurman knew like you got to show him that you got backbone,
Yeah.
and he will respond to that, and he will respect it.
It's amazing. Now, again, the book is The Captain and Me. The cover is brilliant, right? For collectors like myself.
Yeah,
And,
when they showed me that,
yeah.
because a lot of people don't understand that authors don't have control over
Okay.
what the cover is. You may be able to give them some input, and in fact, the first cover they got back to us with was just a picture of Thurman,
Okay.
and I just thought like it just
Kind of a
looks like
slap in the face too to Ron, wouldn't you
well,
think, right?
sure,
Yeah.
and so much of the story is about the two guys, and it's like, and you would not have gotten that impression. It just looked like another Thurman bio. Okay,
Right.
great.
Yeah.
So having them both on the cover like that, and in that 1970 baseball
Awesome.
rookie card template, yeah, I just my heart about leaped out of my chest when I saw that.
And it's ironic that they both have mustaches, right? Which is such a 70s thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. They both had good ones.
Now, one more question for you, and,
Sure.
and you've been brilliant with your time, but tell me the process of co-writing a book with someone, right? Because you've written your own books. What's it like? What's that like?
It's a whole different thing. A lot of it, most of it comes out of conversation. And luckily, Ron is a good talker, so
Yeah.
like I could just kind of let him roll. And I talk about this in the intro. It's funny, like he would get on a tangent, and you could kind of hear him sort of building up in intensity and kind of to something, and all of a sudden he'd go, I'm never going to forget. I'm never going to forget. And it's like, as soon as he said that, like my ears would perk up, because that meant he had some great story that
Yeah.
just popped into his mind, and he was about to lay it on me. So basically, I mean, Ron and I talked on the phone for, probably, 2 days a week, 2 hours at a time for weeks. And so then what I would do is I would take our conversation and listen back to it, and transcribe parts that I thought were, because he would also go off on tangents about like, his gardener and stuff like that. so I would just like transcribe certain parts of it, and nobody loves food like Ron Bloomberg, so we would
Okay.
get off those pages too. But he had some good food stuff for the book. But I mean, to this day, he still doesn't understand that I don't eat meat. He's like,
Okay.
not even pastrami. He's like,
Right.
no, Ron. So I mean, and Ron is a great dude and has so much positive energy, and so that we worked on this like during the early, pretty intensely during the early stages of the pandemic, which was great because that was kind of like a daily or twice weekly burst of positivity that I really needed.
Right. Something to look forward to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so then what I would do is I would look at the stories, and you get this with a lot of ball players, certainly of this era, but I'm sure it's the same with everybody. Like they'll have stories, but they won't maybe get the year right or the season right or the part of, so it's like he would give me these stories, and then the challenge was, okay, how do we, how do I fact check this? How do I, okay, you guys were playing in Boston when this happened, with the the story involves these players, so it'd be like, go to Baseball Reference, look at the schedule for that season, see when they played Boston, see who was actually on the roster at that point, because sometimes he might have the year and the game right, but he might have the wrong player. So it'd be like, then I would go back to him and be like, okay, this is what it found. It couldn't have been this guy, or it couldn't have been this year, but like, what makes sense? And then that would get the wheels turning in his mind, and you'd go, okay, actually, I think it was this, and so we would just kind of dig down like that, and then it would just be, it was just about, it was the format of the book in terms of how we presented it was, I wasn't sure how I wanted to do it at first, because obviously it was going to be more or less chronological, because that's how the story unfolds. But I really hate when I read player autobiographies where the player says something and damn well the player didn't say that, where it starts going into his stats, or
Yeah.
starts going into analysis of certain situation, where it's just like, that's not him. And Ron is a lovely, lovely dude, but he's not, he doesn't talk like that. He's more of a storyteller.
Sure.
So what we hit upon with encouragement from our editor was that I would kind of set the stage in my own voice, talk about how the Yankees were playing this season, talk about who some of the new players on the team were, talk about who the new manager was, talk about some of the behind the scenes stuff that Ron would not have known, or Ron would have been, wouldn't have been paying attention to, because he was paying attention to what was happening on the field. So, so throughout the book, we kind of go like that. Like, I'll sort of be like, and blah, blah, blah. And Ron was hitting, 300 when he ran into, when he hurt his shoulder and, had to be out for a couple of weeks or whatever. And then Ron picks it up and comes out with the colorful stories. And so I felt like that really worked nicely as kind of a tag team thing. And it allowed me to get my own voice into the book, which some of the other, attempted collaborations I've done, it would have been just straight voice of, the person, whose picture is on the book. And so this was a lot more satisfying, because, I really got to, I got to be in it as well.
Well, it's brilliant. It's like play-by-play and color commentary, right? So it's what we grew up listening to. So
yeah, that's subconsciously, that's probably where it all came
from. Audiobook on any of these?
There is an audiobook of Big Hair and Plastic Grass.
Is that you reading that?
That is me reading it.
Very nice.
Which man, writing that book was way easier than I went into it thinking like, oh, how hard could this be?
Yeah.
And I have so much respect now for anybody who does that, does audiobooks for a living, or does any kind of audio stuff, because it really, I mean, it's a grind, and you have to be so focused. And, I remember, like, the company booked the studio for a week, and I thought, like, yeah, no problem, we'll knock that out. And so, like, after 4 hours, my voice was just shredded, and my focus was just like, And, so that it took 2 weeks to do the whole thing.
Wow.
I can't even listen to it, because I can't, but people who have bought it and listened to it have told me how much they loved it. So that's cool.
Yeah, it's a great thing, because we spend time in the car, spend time in the gym, whatnot.
Yeah.
It really is a great alternative.
No, I love the idea of it. I would like to do one of Stars and Strikes. Nobody's offered. And Captain and Me, I'd love to do, but it really needs to be Ron reading it, and I don't see Ron, Ron having the focus to be in a recording state. 4 hours at a time.
Yeah, I mean, that's
unless they can get a good actor to do because he has a southern, he grew up in Atlanta, still lives there, so he has a very southern drawl, but it's like mixed in with his Jewish expressions.
Interesting. Yeah.
So like, you can't just like do, a generic Southern accent and pull Ron Bloomberg off. It doesn't work like that.
That's awesome, man. So here's the trilogy again: Big Hair and Plastic Grass, Stars and Strikes, and The Captain and Me. I'm one out of 3 so far. I wanted to wait until I got the books earlier this week, but then I wanted to wait to talk to you, because I feared once I opened the book, I'd be so encompassed that I wouldn't be able to talk to you. But I can't
You're a
thank you
Kodak.
enough for your time, man.
Oh
It's
man, John, it's been a total pleasure. Your questions
and
are awesome.
I'm gonna pop up your Twitter feed. Where else can we find you? Do you think is this
Um,
it or
that's it. I have a blog, a big hair, big, I think it's bighairplasticgrass.com.
okay?
But if you just type big hair and plastic grass Dan Epstein into your search engine of choice, it'll come up. And I post I post baseball stuff there, but I also post like links to my latest articles, occasional blog posts about musical obsessions that
Right,
I'm currently enjoying or reliving or whatever.
right,
Did a big thing a couple months back about my first Kinks concert,
okay.
and
Where was that?
I was in Chicago. That was at the University of Illinois Circle Campus
Okay,
Pavilion, which was a basketball arena, and saw a lot of shows there in the mid '80s. That was kind of
okay,
like, anybody big came to town who wasn't like big enough to pack a football stadium or
right,
whatever. They played UICC.
okay,
I saw like REM and U2 there and
okay,
stuff
yeah,
like that. But the Kinks one, that was the greatest show I ever saw there.
nice. Do you miss Poplar Creek?
Oh God, I saw Kinks there too, or Popular Creek,
Poplar
as
Creek.
God, you know what? I hated Poplar Creek.
Me too. Yeah,
It was such a pain in the ass to get out there
yeah,
from the city. The incredible traffic, and the sound was always like, if you were anywhere beyond the first 20 rows, the sound was like,
yeah,
like here, like you would, if somebody whispered to you, you'd be like, shush, like I
yeah.
can't hear the music. So yeah, I couldn't. I went out there a bunch of times to see bands just because I wanted to see them.
Yeah,
But like
yeah,
unless I was in the first couple of rows, it was
sure.
a wash.
Well, Dan, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Again, I'll be giving away Big Hair and Plastic Grass this weekend on HobbyPalooza. Um, Dan is the man, and man, I hope you keep spitting books out. I don't know what else you have in your head, but I'm hooked. So
Oh, thanks, man. Well, one way or another, there will be more books. I can promise
awesome.
you that.
All right, Dan. Take care. I'm just going to read us off here. Thanks again for joining me this week on my journey back in time. If you have a comment or suggestion, just reach out at that70scardShow at gmail.com, that70scardShow on YouTube, or 70s Card on Twitter. Mango Safari is playing us off on the podcast. And as always, enjoy collecting and more importantly, enjoy your collection. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you, John.
Bye.